In the late 1980s, when I was in my early 20s, two friends and I decided to take a camping trip deep into Central Florida. It was a trip I've been looking forward to for a long time, and the perfect chance to get away from the noise of everyday life. Both my coworker and I were working for the Park Service at the time, which meant we had access to campsites across the state, often for free. I grew up camping on almost every family vacation, all over Florida, so the outdoors felt like a second home. My other friend, the one who wasn't working with us, had never been camping before, so this was her first real taste of the wilderness. We picked a youth camping area in one of the state parks, a place that was usually busy with kids and groups during the week, but was completely empty on the weekend we arrived. It was much quieter and more isolated than the regular campgrounds, which is why we chose it. We wanted some peace and space to just relax and enjoy nature without crowds. The campsite was nestled among tall pines and live oaks, the kind of trees that made the air feel thick with pine scent and the ground soft with layers of fallen needles and leaves. The earth beneath was sandy but mixed with patches of grass and small shrubs. It was a place that felt untouched, the kind of quiet that seems to hold its breath. On the second day of the trip, later in the afternoon, we all spread out a little around the campsite. We wanted some quiet time but stayed close enough that we could hear each other if needed. I was off to the side, gathering firewood, mostly dead branches that had fallen off trees and some small logs that were just the right size for our bonfire. As I moved through the underbrush, bending low to pick up sticks, I started to get this strange feeling. It was like someone was watching me, but every time I stopped and looked around, there was nothing. No movement, no sound, just stillness. The park was quiet except for the occasional call of a bird or the rustle of a squirrel. I tried to shake the feeling, telling myself it was just my imagination or the kind of nerves that come from being alone in the woods. The sun was low in the sky by then, casting long shadows between the trees. The air was cooler, the heat of the day starting to fade but the humidity still hanging heavy. I noticed how the golden light filtered through the branches, painting patches of orange and red on the forest floor. I kept working, stacking wood near our fire pit. We planned to start the bonfire just as the sun dipped below the horizon. When the fire was finally lit, the flames crackled and popped, sending sparks spiraling up into the darkening sky. The warmth was comforting after the day's work, and the three of us settled in around the fire pit. One of the park rangers, a guy who lived on site in a small cabin about a quarter-mile away, showed up in his pickup truck. He pulled in with a load of extra firewood and, surprisingly, a six-pack of beer, which he shared with us. The conversation was easy and light at first. We talked about the parks, wildlife, and the usual ranger stories. His presence made the place feel a little less empty, like we weren't entirely alone out here. After dark had fully set in, the quiet was broken by the distant noise of teenagers laughing and shouting somewhere on one of the hiking trails. We knew the trails were supposed to be closed after sunset, and the ranger grumbled about how people didn't respect the rules. He and my coworker got in his truck and drove off to find the kids and send them back to their campsites. That left me and my other friend alone by the fire, just soaking in the night sounds and the glow of the flames. The woods around us looked different at night. The trees, which seemed friendly in daylight, now looked tall and dark, almost looming. Shadows danced in the firelight, twisting and stretching across the ground and the trunks. I listened closely to the night. The gentle whisper of wind through the branches, the distant hoot of an owl, the occasional snap of a twig somewhere deeper in the forest. Then something changed. I can't say exactly when, but it started with a cold shiver that crawled up my spine, making the hair on the back of my neck stand on end. It wasn't just a chill from the cool night air. It was a sudden, deep feeling of fear, pure and raw, a sense of danger that settled over me like a weight. It felt like the woods themselves were holding their breath and watching me. I tried to ignore it, telling myself it was just nerves, that nothing was out here but the quiet and the shadows. But the feeling didn't go away. It grew heavier, like an unseen presence pressing in closer. I didn't want to say anything to my friend because I didn't want to scare her. I kept my eyes on the fire, tried to focus on the warmth and the crackling flames, but the fear wouldn't let me rest. Then I glanced over at her, and she was looking at me, Her face was pale in the firelight, and her eyes were wide. She asked quietly if I felt it, and I nodded, feeling more shaken than I wanted to admit. Without saying much else, we both got up, deciding it was best to get back to the car. It was only a short walk away, but even the few steps felt slow, heavy, like we were moving through thick fog. At first, we walked casually, trying not to show that we were scared. But about halfway to the car, we looked at each other again and both broke into a run, adrenaline pushing us forward faster than we expected. The trees blurred past us as we raced through the dark, branches scratching at our arms and legs. The sound of our footsteps pounding on the soft forest floor was the only noise besides our breathing. We reached the car and jumped inside, locking the doors as fast as we could. I grabbed my pistol from the glove box, a small comfort but one that felt weak compared to the fear squeezing my chest. We turned on the headlights, shining bright beams into the darkness outside. The car's interior felt like a fragile bubble against whatever was out there. We sat in silence, both staring straight ahead, too afraid to look around. I had this overwhelming sense that if I turned my head to look out the window, I would see something so wrong, so terrifying, it would break something inside me. The minutes crawled by. The fear was still there, thick and almost physical. It was hard to breathe, hard to calm down. Then, slowly, the pressure started to lift. It was as if whatever was watching us finally moved on, disappeared back into the woods. The night around us returned to its normal quiet, the familiar sounds of insects and rustling leaves coming back like a gentle wave. The sense of danger faded, leaving only the lingering taste of fear. Not long after, the ranger and my coworker came back, their truck headlights cutting through the darkness as they returned from shooing the teenagers away. We tried to act normal, laughing a little and joking about how weird the night had felt, but deep down we all knew something had been off, something unexplainable and real. After that night, I never felt the same about that campsite. The woods had always been a place of comfort and adventure for me, but now they held a shadow I couldn't shake. I never found any explanation for what had happened. No animals, no people, nothing. Just that feeling of being watched, hunted, and the pure, icy grip of fear that had come out of nowhere. I faced tough situations in my life, things that would make most people run. But nothing has ever touched that kind of terror, that raw edge of danger I felt that night in the Florida woods. It wasn't a ghost story or a tale of monsters. It was real, and it was terrifying. I'm still not sure what it was we felt that night, but I know this much. We were in serious danger, and somehow we got lucky. A few years ago, a group of friends and I planned a camping trip. We wanted to spend a weekend in the forest, away from the noise and stress of the city. We picked a well-known campground that was supposed to be beautiful, with trails and a river nearby. But when we got there, the place was completely full. Every single spot was taken, and the ranger told us there was no room for more campers. We were disappointed but didn't want to give up on the trip, so we decided to find a spot deeper in the forest, far from the campground. We figured if we went several miles back into the woods, we could find a quiet place to set up our tents and still enjoy nature. We packed our gear and started driving down a dirt road that led into thick woods, with no signs of people or other campsites around. After about an hour of driving, we found a small clearing big enough for our tents. It wasn't an official camping spot by any means, but it seemed perfect for what we wanted: complete isolation. That first day, we set up camp and enjoyed the silence and fresh air. We made a fire, cooked some food, and laughed around the flames. The forest was dense, and the trees were tall and close together. Birds sang in the afternoon sun, and the only sounds were the rustling of leaves and the crackling of the fire. As night fell, we all settled into our tents, feeling relaxed and happy to be away from everything. But then something strange happened. Around 2 a.m, I woke up to a sound. At first, I thought it was just the wind moving through the trees, but the sound was different. It was rhythmic, steady, and strangely familiar. It was drumming. Not just any drumming, but deep, low beats that seemed to echo through the forest. Then, over the drumming, I heard singing. It wasn't clear or loud enough to make out words, but it had a melody that reminded me of traditional Native American songs. It wasn't just one voice, but several, singing in a low, haunting way. The weirdest part was that the sound didn't seem to come from one place. It felt like it was all around us, coming from the trees, the shadows, the air itself. It was as if the forest was alive and singing. At first, I thought maybe some campers nearby were playing music or holding a ceremony, but I knew there were no other campers anywhere close. I lay frozen in my sleeping bag, heart pounding. There was something deeply wrong about the music. It wasn't just strange or unexpected. It was the kind of feeling you get when your body tells you danger is near, even if your mind can't explain why. The hair on my arms stood up, and I couldn't shake the sense that whatever was making the noise was not meant to be there, or maybe wasn't human. I shook my friend awake. She was Navajo, and I thought she might know what this music was. She listened carefully for a moment, eyes wide in the dark, then whispered that it sounded like some of the songs used in tribal rituals, but not any she'd heard near where we were camping. Still, she agreed it was unusual and didn't feel right. We decided to leave the tents and sleep in the car for the rest of the night. The enclosed space felt safer, and even though the drumming and singing continued, it felt less threatening when we were inside the vehicle. None of us slept much. The next morning, we went out to explore the area around our campsite. We walked through the forest and looked for any signs of other people. Footprints, tents, trash, anything. But we found nothing. The clearing was isolated, and the trees were thick, but there were no signs anyone else was near. We even walked for miles along the dirt road that led back to the main campground, but we didn't see any campsites or hear any other sounds besides birds and wind. That day, we talked a lot about the music. None of us could explain it. We tried to convince ourselves it was some natural sound, maybe wind blowing through hollow logs or animals making noises. But the drumming was too steady and too rhythmic for that, and the singing too human-like to be mistaken for animal calls. We decided to stay one more night, telling ourselves we were just being paranoid. Maybe the first night had just been a strange coincidence, or our imaginations playing tricks on us in the dark. We set up our tents again, but that night was worse. Around the same time, 2 a.m, the drumming started again. Only this time it was closer, louder, clearer. The singing was stronger, more intense, and definitely coming from one direction, somewhere just beyond the tree line. The feeling of wrongness was overwhelming. It wasn't just fear. It was a deep sense that something was watching us, waiting, and that we were not welcome there. I could feel the panic rising in my chest, my breath getting shallow. My friends were quiet, too scared to move or speak. We stayed awake the whole night, huddled in the tents, listening to the music grow louder and then fade, like it was moving around us. We never saw any lights or figures, just heard the sounds. When dawn finally came, the music stopped. The forest was quiet again. We packed up as fast as we could and headed back to the main campground. To our surprise, it was now open and had plenty of empty spots. We moved there and stayed the rest of the weekend without any more strange noises or feelings. Even now, years later, I still think about those nights. I still don't have any answers. How could there have been music and singing so close, but no other people anywhere around? Why would someone be making those sounds in the middle of the night, deep in the forest where no one else was camping? And why did it feel so wrong, like a warning or a sign? My Navajo friend said it reminded her of songs from tribal dances or rituals, but we weren't on tribal land, and no one nearby claimed to know anything about ceremonies in that area. It felt like something ancient, something meant to stay hidden. Sometimes, when I'm alone and it's quiet outside, I can almost hear the faint drumming in the back of my mind. It's a reminder that there are things in the world we don't understand, things that can make us feel small and uneasy for no clear reason. That trip changed the way I think about camping and being alone in the woods. I still love the outdoors, but I don't go looking for that kind of silence anymore. I don't want to hear the forest sing in the night again. I had been planning a solo camping trip for months. I needed a break from the constant noise of the city, from work, from people. I didn't want company. I didn't want the sound of anyone else's voice. I wanted to get out into the hills of Southern California, set up a small camp, and spend a few days just sitting under the sun, walking quiet trails and breathing clean air. It was supposed to be peaceful. I chose a spot that wasn't too remote, but not in one of the usual busy campsites. It was the early part of summer, the time when the skies are bright and the air is dry. The hills were already turning a brittle brown, and I knew the fire risk was high, but I thought if I stayed careful, I would be fine. I wasn't going to light any fires. I wasn't going to smoke. I wasn't going to do anything that could cause a spark. I packed simple food that didn't need cooking, lots of water, a tent, a sleeping bag, and a small fold-out chair. I planned to stay for 2 nights, maybe 3 if it went well. I parked my car on a dirt turnout along a service road and hiked about a mile into a quiet little hollow where I could set up camp. There were tall dry grasses on the edges, patches of bare dirt, and scattered oak trees with low thick branches. The air was dry but still. The sky was sharp blue. The first day went exactly how I wanted. I spent the morning walking the trails, the afternoon sitting in my chair, reading, and just letting the hours go by. The quiet was perfect. I hadn't seen anyone since I'd left my car. That night I fell asleep early and woke to a bright morning, warm air, and not much wind. I could hear the faint sounds of insects buzzing in the dry brush and the scratch of small animals moving nearby. I spent the second day exploring farther along the trails, climbing a few low ridges to look out over the dry hills. The heat was steady but not terrible. But when I returned to my camp that afternoon, I noticed something faint in the air. It wasn't much, just a thin smell, a burnt, dry smell, like the faint edge of a wood fire, but so weak it could have been in my head. I sat down, drank some water, and watched the sky. There were no clouds. The air was still. The smell came and went through the evening. By sunset, I could see a slight haze on the horizon, but it wasn't much. I figured it was a small fire, maybe controlled, maybe some prescribed burn. I'd seen that before in this area. I wasn't alarmed, but I noted it. I ate, sat in my chair until the light went down, and went to sleep. When I woke up early the next morning, the air felt different. It was still warm, but there was something heavier about it. I could see a pale gray tint in the distance, stretching low along the hills. The smell of smoke was sharper now, more present, not thick but noticeable. I figured the fire must have grown overnight, but I wasn't sure where it was or how far away. I thought I had plenty of time to pack up and leave if it got worse. I had breakfast and debated whether I should stay or go. It was still early, still calm. I walked up one of the nearby ridges to get a better look. From the higher ground, I could see a distant column of smoke, thin and pale gray, stretching slowly into the sky. It looked miles away. There was no sense of panic in me. It just seemed distant. I figured I would stay one more night and leave the next morning. I was mostly packed anyway. I didn't need to wait long if things changed. But as the day went on, the smoke in the distance thickened. The wind, which had been barely moving, started to pick up in slow gusts. By afternoon, I could feel it on my skin. A warm, pushing wind that came from the direction of the fire. More ash began to fall, fine white particles like dust landing on my arms, my pack, and the fabric of my chair. I could feel it in my lungs. It was a sharp edge in the back of my throat, a thin burning feeling that wasn't there before. I started to cough, not much, but enough to notice. I drank water and tried to ignore it. I kept thinking the fire was still too far to worry about, but the wind kept picking up. The air was warmer now, hotter even though the sun was slipping lower in the sky. I could see the way the grass shifted in the breeze. I could see how the smoke was thicker in the dips between the hills. The fine ash was constant now. It was in my hair. It was on the ground like a light snowfall that didn't melt. I knew I shouldn't wait. I packed quickly, shoving everything into my bag, pulling up the stakes on my tent without folding it properly. I threw everything together and started moving. I wasn't running, but I was walking fast, heading back the way I came, back toward where I had left my car. But the smoke was getting thicker as I went. It was sliding over the hills faster now, not in a steady cloud, but in rolling patches that swept low and heavy. I kept coughing. The air felt thick in my chest. I had to stop and pull my shirt over my mouth to help me breathe. though it didn't do much. I realized I had misjudged the wind. The fire wasn't just spreading wide. It was being driven hard in one direction, toward me. The trails I had used before were harder to follow now. Ash was falling more heavily, and some parts of the brush were already smoldering. I moved faster, stepping over dry branches, pushing through the low scrub. I could see small embers scattered across the ground in places, still faint and glowing but alive. My lungs burned. Every breath was a sharp pull. I was sweating hard, but I felt cold at the same time. My hands were shaking. I tried to remember how far I had walked in from the car. It hadn't felt far when I came in. Felt far now. The wind was steady in my face. The smoke was thicker here. I could barely see more than a few feet ahead of me. The sky, which had been clear all morning, was now a solid gray-brown, dark enough that it felt like early evening though it was still afternoon. I kept moving, fast but careful, trying not to trip, trying not to step on anything burning. Then I heard something new, a low rushing sound. At first, I thought it was the wind itself, but it had a deeper pulse to it, like a constant roar that grew as I moved. I didn't need to see it to know what it was. The fire was much closer now. I pushed harder, almost running. The smoke made my head feel light. My legs were tired, but I didn't dare stop. When I finally reached the edge of the trail that led down toward the road, I could see the sky was brighter in that direction. The wind was blowing the smoke away from the road and toward the hills. I followed the path quickly, stumbling in the loose dirt. The sound of the fire was louder now, a steady deep roar like a freight train. I could feel the heat even though I couldn't see the flames yet. Embers floated past me, glowing orange, some landing in the dry grass around me. I reached my car, dropped my pack, and fumbled the keys out of my pocket with shaking hands. I got the door open and fell into the seat, slamming the door shut behind me. I sat there breathing hard, coughing, my lungs sharp and tight, my head spinning. I started the engine and pulled onto the dirt road. I drove fast, bouncing over rocks and ruts, the car shaking under me. I didn't care. I just needed distance. The fire was behind me, the smoke trailing low across the hills. I drove until I reached a paved road, then kept going until I hit a small gas station on the edge of a nearby town. I pulled in, parked, and sat there for a long time. My hands were still shaking. My shirt was gray with ash. My skin felt gritty. My lungs burned with every breath. Later, I found out the fire had been sparked by something simple. Someone's car had pulled off the road onto dry grass. The heat from the undercarriage started it. The fire had spread fast, carried by the wind, pushed straight toward where I had been camping. People later told me I had been lucky, but I didn't feel lucky. I felt like I had been stupid. I had waited too long. I thought the fire was far away. I thought I could beat it if I needed to. I could still feel it in my lungs for days after. I would breathe and feel that sharp edge, that rough burning sensation like sand in my chest. Every time I coughed, I remembered that walk, the haze closing in around me, the sound of the fire growing louder, the fine ash falling like snow. I learned something about fires that day. I learned they don't always move how you think. I learned that you can't count on distance. I learned that when the wind turns, you need to move right then. It took me a long time to feel comfortable hiking again. Even now, when I walk through the hills and I catch the faintest scent of smoke in the air, I feel my body tense. I feel my lungs tighten. I remember how quickly everything can turn bad, and I don't wait anymore. When I was a kid, probably around 8 or 9 years old, camping used to be something my family did a lot. We lived in a small town, the kind of place where people knew each other, and going out to the woods was one of the cheapest and easiest ways to get away. My mom loved camping, and my grandma loved it too. My brothers and I always looked forward to it, especially because we had this one campsite that sort of felt like our own little spot in the world. We had been going to the same place for years. It wasn't a big campground with rows of RVs and noise all the time. It was smaller, quieter, more tucked away. Over the years, we had slowly built up our own little camp setup there. We had moved logs to make seats, we had a perfect fire pit we always reused, and there was even a good flat spot where we always set up the tent. That summer, we had gone back again. This time, though, there was something different. My aunt and uncle were away on military tours, and we were watching their two dogs. Their names were Star and Ariel. Both were bird dogs, the kind you see trained to stay calm and focused, the kind that would stay right at your side unless you gave them a signal. They were usually really sweet dogs, good with us kids, and even though they were trained to hunt, they mostly just laid around or followed us quietly when we went exploring the woods. They were part of the family, and we felt safe with them. The day we arrived at the campground, everything felt normal. We unpacked the car and set up the tent in the same flat spot we always used. The fire pit was still there from the last time, and the logs we had rolled over to use as seats were where we left them. The place felt familiar, like it always did. We spent the day hiking around, collecting firewood, and just playing in the woods near the camp. It was the kind of day that made you forget about everything else. The weather was nice, the sun was out, and nothing seemed out of place. That night, after dinner, we sat around the fire for a while. The sky was clear and we could see a lot of stars. I remember the way the fire crackled, the smell of the smoke, and the way the cold started to set in once the sun went down. Eventually, we all went to the tent. It was a big tent that could fit all of us. My mom, my grandma, my brothers, and me. Star and Ariel slept inside the tent too, like they always did. They usually curled up near the door flap and didn't make a sound all night. That first night, everything seemed fine when we went to bed. I remember I was so tired from running around all day that I fell asleep quickly. It was the middle of the night when something woke me up. I didn't know what time it was, but everything was dark and quiet. At first, I thought I was just dreaming or that maybe I needed to go to the bathroom. But then I realized I could hear a low growling sound. It was Star. She was growling from the front of the tent. It wasn't playful or anything like that. It was steady and serious, like something had her full attention. I remember just lying there, frozen, listening to her growl. Ariel was up too. Both of them were stiff, their bodies tense, ears perked forward, focused on something outside. It wasn't just some animal passing by, not the way they were acting. I could feel the tension in the air, and it made my stomach drop. My mom noticed it too. She started moving around, getting up carefully. She didn't panic, but I could tell she was being cautious. She grabbed the flashlight, probably thinking it was just some animal in the woods. Star and Ariel stayed right in front of the tent door, still growling, still not taking their eyes off whatever it was outside. When my mom unzipped the tent to step out, both dogs moved with her. It was like they were blocking her from going in a certain direction. They pushed themselves in front of her, herding her carefully toward the car, but at the same time, they kept themselves between her and the other side of the campsite. It was like they were telling her not to go that way. Every time she tried to move around them, they would step in front of her again. They weren't playing. They weren't being disobedient. They were in a defensive position, stiff, low to the ground, ready to attack. But they weren't charging forward. They were staying in front of the tent, in front of my mom, keeping that space between her and whatever was out there. By this point, we were all awake. My brothers and I sat up, scared and shaking. None of us really knew what was going on, but we could feel it in the air, that something was wrong. Even my grandma, who had been camping her whole life, looked worried. I think the part that sticks with me the most is that my mom didn't argue with the dogs or try to force them to move. She must have felt something wasn't right because she made a quick decision. She started packing things up, not carefully, not in the usual slow way where you fold everything and make sure nothing gets left behind. She just shoved things into bags, pulled the stakes from the tent while it was still half full, grabbed whatever she could, and loaded it into the car as fast as possible. The whole time, Star and Ariel stayed close, still growling, still watching the same direction. The growling never really stopped until we got into the car. The rest of us were in a panic. I remember crying and my brothers crying too. Everything had gone from peaceful to terrifying in a matter of minutes. The woods, which had always felt like home to us, suddenly felt dangerous and unfamiliar. We got in the car, and my mom started driving out of the campground as quickly as she could. Star and Ariel sat in the back with us, but they didn't settle down. They sat upright, tense, their eyes still sharp and alert, still growling low in their throats like whatever they had seen or sensed wasn't gone. It wasn't until we were about 10 minutes down the road that something else happened. My mom noticed that there was a car following us. At first, maybe you'd think it was just someone else leaving the campground at the same time. But this car stayed right behind us, sticking close, never slowing down, never taking a different turn. Even as a kid, I knew something was off about it. The road out of the campground wasn't busy, especially at night. There were no other cars on the road except us and that one. The car stayed behind us for a long time. Every time my mom sped up, the car would speed up too. It never tried to pass us. It never fell back. It just kept its distance, close enough to be seen in the rearview mirror, but far enough that it didn't get right up on our bumper. We were all scared. My brothers were crying. I remember I kept looking over my shoulder at the back window, watching the headlights behind us. I told myself maybe it was nothing. Maybe they just happened to be going the same way. Maybe they were scared too. That's what you do when you're a kid. You try to make up stories to explain things in a way that doesn't scare you as much. But deep down, I didn't believe it. We had to cross a big bridge to get back into town. It was the kind of bridge you couldn't really stop on. It was long, with a clear view all the way across. As we started driving onto the bridge, the car that had been following us suddenly slowed down. It didn't come onto the bridge with us. It stopped right before the entrance to the bridge and then, without hesitating, turned around and sped off in the opposite direction. That was the moment where everything seemed to click. Whoever had been following us wasn't just some random camper heading home. They had been following us on purpose, but for some reason, they didn't want to go into town. They didn't want to be seen. Maybe they thought they could scare us, maybe they had worse plans, I don't know. But they turned back fast, almost like they didn't want to risk being caught where there might be other people around. We finally made it into town and stopped at a gas station. By that point, everyone was exhausted, crying, and on the edge of a meltdown. My mom got out to go into the gas station, probably to buy cigarettes, but something weird happened when she came back. Star, who had always been a calm dog, wouldn't let her back in the car right away. She stood in the doorway, blocking my mom from getting in until she could fully see her face and be sure it was her. Only then did Star move aside. That moment stayed with me. The whole night did. I never forgot how quickly everything changed, how fast the woods went from feeling like home to feeling dangerous. We didn't talk much about it after that night. My mom never really explained what she thought was going on, but it always felt like she knew something bad was about to happen, even if she couldn't put it into words. That trip changed how I felt about camping. We went a few more times after that, but I never really enjoyed it the same way again. I stopped feeling safe out there. The woods didn't feel like ours anymore. They felt like somewhere you could run into the wrong kind of people. I still think about that night sometimes. I think about how if the dogs hadn't growled, if my mom hadn't trusted them, if she had hesitated, maybe that car would have caught up to us. Maybe the people in that car would have done something worse. Maybe we wouldn't have made it back to town. Star and Ariel probably saved us that night. I don't know what they saw or what they smelled, but they knew something was wrong. They knew it before we did. Looking back, I think that's what makes me stay away from camping now. It's not the animals, not the bugs, not the weather. It's knowing that sometimes the danger isn't what you expect. Sometimes the scariest thing out there is another person. And sometimes the only reason you make it out safe is because you listen to the ones who could sense it first. I was 15 when it happened. That summer, me and two of my friends, Mark and Jason, decided we were old enough to go camping on our own. We wanted to prove we didn't need adults to watch us. We picked a spot in the woods, not too far from Mark's house, but far enough that we felt like we were deep in the wild. We packed light, just a tent, some snacks, and sleeping bags. We brought a lighter to make a fire and a couple of flashlights. None of us really thought about danger. We figured the worst thing we might face was a raccoon getting into our food. The first day was normal. We hiked, we built our camp, and we gathered some sticks to make a fire. We roasted marshmallows and sat around the flames as the sky went dark. It was the usual teenage stuff. We talked about school, girls, and stupid stories we heard about the woods. We weren't scared. We didn't think we had any reason to be. But then night came. Full dark. The woods got so quiet that every little sound seemed louder. Every crack of a stick or rustle of leaves grabbed our attention. It didn't bother me at first. The woods are full of animals. They move around. It happens. Mark and Jason got a little jumpy though. They kept asking if I heard things. I told them it was probably nothing, just animals. I said it over and over. I said it to calm them, but honestly, I was trying to calm myself too. The noises seemed to be getting closer. First, it was just the soft snapping of twigs. Then the sounds got heavier, like footsteps, slow ones. We sat there, staring into the dark beyond our fire. Our flashlights couldn't reach far enough to see anything clearly. I kept brushing it off. I didn't want to let fear control the night. I figured the sounds would stop eventually, but then I heard running. Full-on, heavy running. Feet slamming against the ground, coming straight toward our tent. I had just enough time to think, this is not an animal, before the footsteps stopped. That's when I realized what was about to happen. There was a long second of silence, and then someone jumped on our tent. It crushed down on us, snapping the poles and collapsing the fabric around us. We scrambled out from under it, kicking and shoving until we were free. Jason was shaking. Mark looked like he might cry. I was frozen, trying to process what just happened. I looked around, but whoever it was had already taken off into the trees. We made a mistake right then. Instead of packing up and leaving or hiding, we grabbed our flashlights and searched for whoever it was. I guess part of me wanted to prove it was just a prank or some other kids fooling around. We walked away from the fire, shining our lights into the woods. We saw nothing, just trees and shadows. But by stepping out, we gave ourselves away. We showed we were just 3 kids, 15 years old, scrawny, out here alone. That's when we saw them. 2 figures, older, maybe 18 or 19. They were taller, bigger. They didn't try to hide once they saw us. They let us see them. They just stood there, one of them holding something in his hand. Took me a second to realize it was a hammer. Just a regular hammer, but the way he carried it made it clear what he wanted it for. We backed away and went straight to the fire. We sat close to it like the light would protect us somehow. But they didn't leave. They circled us. We could see them now and then, just on the edge of the firelight. They would disappear behind trees, then reappear somewhere else. Always moving, always watching. The hammer guy swung it sometimes just casually, like he was warming up his arm. We stayed up all night. None of us even tried to sleep. We kept the fire going as best we could, throwing on sticks and dry leaves, anything that would keep it burning. They stayed close, just far enough to be out of reach, but always visible if we looked hard enough. They weren't trying to hide. They wanted us to know they were there. I kept thinking, what do they want? If they wanted to rob us, they could have done it already. If they wanted to beat us up, they could have done that too. But they didn't. They just stayed there, stalking us, watching. I didn't feel scared in the usual way. It was more like my body was stuck in this constant state of tension. Like I was waiting for something to happen, but it never did. I couldn't let my guard down, not even for a second. The fire got low a couple of times, and when it did, they would come closer. When the flames burned high, they would drift back into the trees. It was like a silent game of control. They weren't talking. They weren't laughing. They weren't doing anything but moving, always moving around us. At some point, Jason said he wanted to make a run for it, but none of us could leave the fire. It felt like leaving it would mean stepping into their space, and we knew we wouldn't win if they wanted to chase us. I kept my eyes on the hammer. That was the thing that made all of this more real. A hammer isn't just some random thing you bring to scare kids. It's something you can really hurt someone with. They kept us pinned there, trapped by the firelight, until the sky started to turn gray. First light. The birds started making noise again. The world felt like it was slowly coming back to normal. But they didn't leave when the sun came up. They walked right up to us. One of them, the one with the hammer, stood there like he was waiting for us to say something. He kept twirling the hammer in his hand like he was looking for any excuse to use it. It was weird. The sun was up, but they still acted like the night wasn't over. I thought they would just walk off when morning came, but they stayed. They kept pacing around like they wanted us to start something so they could finish it. We didn't. We just sat there, not saying a word, not making a move. After a few minutes that felt like hours, they finally turned and left. Just like that. No big moment, no final threat, no attack. They just left us there. We sat by the fire for a long time after they were gone. Not sure if it was really over. Took us a while to even start moving. We packed our stuff in silence, folded up the wrecked tent as best we could, and walked back to Mark's house. I kept thinking about them the whole way back. They stayed up all night, circling us, watching us, waiting. They didn't get anything out of it. They didn't steal from us. They didn't hurt us. They just wanted to scare us. And they did a good job of it. When I think about it now, years later, what sticks with me isn't the fear. It's how bizarre it was that they were willing to put in so much effort, to stay awake all night, just to mess with some kids. They weren't high or drunk, at least not that I could tell. They seemed like they were fully aware of what they were doing. They just wanted to scare us for their own amusement, to prove they could control the night. I never went back to that spot again. I never camped in the woods without adults after that. I still think about those two sometimes. I wonder if they kept doing that to other people. I wonder what would have happened if we had tried to run or fight back. I wonder if they would have used that hammer. But the thing I remember most is that feeling of sitting by the fire, trapped by its light, knowing we were being watched, knowing that they were always just close enough to remind us we weren't safe. That night didn't end with some big moment of bravery or escape. It just ended because they chose to let it end. That's what makes it stick with me. We were never in control of that night. We were just lucky they decided to move on. People talk a lot about bears, mountain lions, snakes, and all the other wild animals you might run into out in the woods. I grew up hearing about all of them. How you had to hang your food, how you had to make noise to scare off bears, how to back away slowly from a mountain lion. You could probably list all those safety rules in your sleep if you went camping as much as I did when I was younger. But there's something people never really warned me about, something I figured out for myself out there. The scariest thing in the woods is other people. It happened when I was about 17. I had done plenty of camping trips before, sometimes with family, sometimes with friends. That time, I went out with two of my friends, Ben and Jake. We had this 3-day weekend and wanted to get away from school, from parents, from everything. We picked this remote spot in a national forest, not an established campground. It was one of those places you had to hike a little off the main trail to reach, and we liked that. We wanted to be alone, out in the middle of nowhere. The first day was normal. We hiked in, set up our tents, got a fire going, and spent the evening cooking over the flames and laughing. It was quiet, peaceful. Nothing but the wind in the trees and the crackle of the fire. We fell asleep that night feeling safe, feeling like we were exactly where we wanted to be. The second day we explored a bit, walked along the nearby creek, found a spot with a great view. We didn't see anyone else the whole day. Felt like we had the whole forest to ourselves. We stayed up late that night, sitting by the fire, just talking. It was sometime after midnight when we finally crawled into our tents. I shared one with Jake and Ben had his own. I'm not sure what woke me up. Maybe it was just the silence, maybe a small sound that I didn't register fully. But I lay there in my sleeping bag, eyes open, heart slowly starting to beat harder, feeling like something wasn't right. I listened. For a while, I didn't hear anything, just the normal sounds of the woods, the occasional rustle of leaves or creak of a tree. Then I heard footsteps, not animals, not that cautious padding you get from a raccoon or a fox. Heavy, deliberate steps. More than one set, people walking around just outside our camp. I could hear them moving around near Ben's tent. I held my breath, straining to hear more. Jake shifted in his sleep beside me, not waking up. The steps circled the camp slowly, crunching on twigs and leaves. I thought maybe it was rangers. But what ranger walks around someone's tent at 2 in the morning without announcing themselves? My stomach started to twist into knots. After a few minutes, the footsteps faded. I sat there frozen for a long time, listening hard, but I couldn't hear anything else. I told myself maybe it had been animals, maybe I imagined it. I finally drifted back to sleep, though it was restless and shallow. The next morning, I got up early and quietly walked around the camp. I didn't want to freak Jake or Ben out unless I found something. At first, everything looked normal, but then I noticed faint boot prints near Ben's tent. They circled around it, walked between the fire pit and our tents, then disappeared back into the woods. I didn't know what to make of it. There weren't any cars near where we parked, no other campers, and who would be out here this far just wandering around people's tents at night? I thought about mentioning it, but part of me didn't want to ruin the trip. I told myself maybe it was nothing, maybe some hunter passing through, maybe they didn't even notice us, so I didn't tell them. I thought I could just keep an eye out, be more aware. That afternoon we hiked to another spot we had talked about seeing. It was a few miles away from our camp, and we spent most of the day out there. We got back to camp in the late afternoon and things were where we left them. Nothing seemed to be disturbed. It helped me relax a little. As the sun went down, I still felt a little on edge, but I pushed it down. We had another fire, cooked dinner, and stayed up late again. When we finally got into our tents, I was exhausted enough to fall asleep quickly. Sometime later, the noises came back. At first, it was just faint snapping of twigs. Then there was this dragging sound, something scraping along the dirt. My heart jumped. I lay there, not moving, listening harder. Jake was asleep again, breathing slowly beside me. I heard soft footsteps moving closer. Then a second set. This time there was no doubt. 2 people were circling our camp, slow and steady, taking their time. I heard one of them pass close to our tent, then the sound of dirt shifting like someone squatting down near our fire pit. I waited, breathing as shallow as I could, frozen in place. Then I heard something I'll never forget. Fast, pounding steps. Someone was running right at our tent. The sound came so suddenly, so loudly, I didn't have time to think. Then came the weight of a body slamming into the side of our tent, the nylon collapsing on top of me and Jake. I scrambled out of the sleeping bag, pushing the tent fabric off me, my heart hammering. I could hear someone running away, their feet slapping against the ground. Jake was awake now, panicked and confused, trying to figure out what had happened. We crawled out of the collapsed tent and found Ben standing by the fire, holding a stick in his hands, his face pale and wide-eyed. We scanned the tree line but didn't see anyone. Whoever had jumped on the tent had already disappeared into the dark. That was when we made the mistake. Instead of staying put, instead of waiting and keeping close, we grabbed our flashlights and went searching. We split up, thinking we could find who it was, thinking we could catch them or scare them off. I didn't really think about what we'd do if we actually found them. I just wanted to know who was out there. I walked through the trees, scanning with my flashlight, heart racing. I caught a glimpse of movement a few times, but it was always just out of reach. Then I heard something close behind me. I spun around and caught the flash of someone ducking behind a tree, way too close to me. I shouted out for Ben and Jake, but immediately regretted it. I had just given away my position. I turned and ran back toward camp, hearing fast footsteps behind me. When I broke through the trees into our campsite, I found Ben and Jake already there, both breathing hard, both clearly spooked. That was when we realized our mistake. By going out looking for them, we had shown them who we were, shown them we were just 3 teenagers. And whoever they were, they weren't leaving. For the rest of the night, we saw them. They stayed just outside the reach of the firelight, always circling, always moving. Sometimes they would let us catch a glimpse, a flash of a jacket, a figure moving behind a tree. We knew they wanted us to see them. They stayed out there for hours, not sleeping, not stopping. One of them carried a hammer. I only saw it once, the way it caught the light when he adjusted his grip on it. After that, I couldn't stop seeing the hammer in my mind, thinking about what they planned to do with it. We didn't sleep at all. We sat close to the fire, backs to each other, watching every direction. Every now and then we'd hear a twig snap or footsteps shifting, and our eyes would dart toward the sound. But they never came closer. They just stalked us from the edges. When the first light of morning started to break through the trees, they didn't leave. They just got bolder. 2 of them walked right up to the camp, the hammer still in one of their hands. They stood there, looking at us, not speaking, not doing anything for a few long seconds. They didn't need to talk. Their presence said everything. Eventually, they turned and walked away, slowly, calmly, like they had all the time in the world. We packed up as fast as we could and left everything we could spare behind, hiking out without stopping, without looking back. We didn't talk much on the way out. There wasn't much to say. I've thought about it a lot since then. Those guys weren't out there by accident. They probably lived nearby, or maybe they came out to those woods just to mess with people, just to see what they could get away with. They didn't rob us. They didn't attack us. They just wanted to scare us. And they did. I don't go camping in remote spots anymore. I still love the outdoors, but I stick to campgrounds now. Somewhere with people nearby, somewhere where you're not completely alone. Because out there, far from anyone, far from help, it isn't the animals you need to worry about. It's the people. And I learned that the hard way. I never thought much about wildfires. I saw them on the news, watched the videos of people evacuating, planes dropping water, all of it, but I never thought I'd be in one. I liked camping. I went out alone a lot. I liked the quiet. I liked the routine of setting up camp, building a fire, cooking simple meals, and just sitting with the sounds of the woods around me. No phone service, no one bothering me, just me and the forest. This trip was supposed to be like that. It was early summer, not too hot yet, but the days were getting longer, and the fire warnings were already posted in some places. I didn't think much of it. I was careful. I always put out my fires properly. I brought a small shovel and extra water to make sure the ashes were cold before I went to sleep or before I left a site. I knew what I was doing, or at least I thought I did. The place I chose this time was a little lake in the forest, not too far from a logging road. I parked my truck where the road ended and hiked in a couple of miles with my gear. I planned to stay for 3 nights. It was a good spot. Trees circled the lake, but there was a small clearing by the shore where I could set up my tent. The water was clear, and you could see the small fish swimming near the rocks. The air was clean, and there was no one else around. It was perfect. The first day was peaceful. I set up my tent, gathered firewood, cooked some food, and relaxed by the water. I even went for a swim to cool off. I liked how quiet it was. I didn't see any other campers or hikers. I stayed up until dark, listening to the crickets and watching the stars. I felt like I was the only person in the world. The second day was more of the same. I explored a little farther around the lake, following some animal trails, but I didn't see anything worth worrying about. I saw some deer tracks and some old bear scat, but it didn't look fresh. I stayed close to camp most of the time. The weather was warm, but there was a breeze. I made sure my fire was always small and controlled. I never left it unattended. I kept my cooking simple. I had some instant noodles and canned food. I didn't even light a fire at lunch, just cold food. I thought I was being responsible. That night, as I sat by my little fire, I noticed the breeze was stronger. The air felt drier. The trees rustled more than before. I didn't think much of it, though. I just made sure to douse the fire really well before going to bed. I poured water over the coals and stirred them until I could touch them with my hand. I went to sleep feeling calm. The third day started to feel different. When I woke up, the air smelled faintly of smoke. It was distant, barely noticeable, but it was there. I walked to the other side of the lake to see if I could spot anything, but the sky was clear. I figured it was probably a controlled burn far away. Sometimes the Forest Service did that. I thought I would pack up the next morning just to be safe, but I didn't feel any immediate danger. I went about my day like normal. I fished a little, read a book I brought, and kept checking the sky. In the late afternoon, the wind shifted, picked up fast, stronger than before, and it carried more smoke with it. I could see a faint haze now, hanging low between the trees. That made me nervous. I decided I would leave first thing in the morning, maybe even before sunrise. But the fire didn't wait for morning. By the time the sun was setting, the smoke was thick enough that it made my throat scratchy. The wind kept coming hard from the south, and when I looked in that direction, I saw a faint glow. It was still far, but not as far as I would have liked. I didn't know how fast it was moving. I didn't know how big it was. I just knew that I had to leave. I stuffed everything I could into my pack and stamped out the little fire I had started for dinner. I poured all my extra water on it. I didn't even bother to wait for the ashes to cool this time. I just wanted to go. The trail I had used to come in went south for a bit before turning west toward the truck. That was the problem. The fire was coming from the south. If I went down the trail, I would be heading straight toward it. I looked at the map I had printed out. There were other logging roads to the north, but they were miles away. There were no official trails leading there, just thick forest. It would take me too long to bushwhack through it, especially with the fire moving. I considered circling the lake and waiting to see if the fire would pass, but I didn't know enough about how fires moved. I didn't know how long I would have before it reached me. I thought about something I had heard once. If you're trapped by a wildfire and you can't outrun it, you can try to find water. Lakes, rivers, anything like that. Fire won't burn the water. It made sense. I had always wondered, could you just sit in the lake and wait? Would the fire burn the trees around you but leave you alone? Would the heat still kill you? I didn't know, but I was already at the lake. I figured it was probably safer than trying to run blind through the woods or heading straight into the smoke on the trail. The wind kept pushing hard, and I could hear the fire now. A low roar, almost like distant traffic but deeper. It was a wall of sound. I saw bits of ash falling around me. Tiny black flakes drifted down like strange snow. The air was getting hotter, even though the sun had almost set. I grabbed my pack and pulled out what I thought I might need. I put my water bottles and some energy bars in a dry bag and tied it shut. I left the rest of my gear. It didn't matter anymore. I slipped on my lightweight hiking shoes and walked into the lake until the water was up to my chest. I held the dry bag close. I figured I could float with it or at least keep it above the water. I stayed near the middle of the lake, treading water and sometimes letting myself float on my back to rest. I watched as the glow through the trees got brighter and brighter. I could hear the crackling now, loud and sharp, mixed with the roaring wind. The trees swayed hard. I saw flames jumping from one to another. I saw branches catch fire and drop, sending sparks in all directions. The fire reached the edge of the lake. I could feel the heat on my face, even though I was in the water. The smoke was thick, but I stayed low, trying to breathe where the air was clearer just above the water. I kept my mouth and nose close to the surface. It was terrifying. The whole shoreline was burning. The fire raced along the edge, consuming everything. I could hear trees snapping and falling. I could see the orange light reflecting off the ripples around me. Ash rained down everywhere, hissing when it touched the water. I stayed in the lake as the fire passed. Felt like forever. I kept thinking about whether the heat would be too much. I thought about whether the fire would last long enough to boil the water, but it never got that bad. The water stayed cool below the surface. It was only the air above that burned. When the worst of the flames had moved past, I slowly made my way to the opposite side of the lake, away from where my camp had been. The trees on that side were scorched, but some were still standing. I found a spot where the ground was mostly bare and sat there, wrapped in my emergency blanket from the dry bag. The sky was dark now, but the horizon still glowed. The air smelled like 1,000 campfires burned all at once. I stayed there all night. I didn't sleep. I just sat, listening to the distant crackling and feeling the cold slowly return as the fire moved away. The sun rose, pale and weak through the smoky sky. Everything was quiet except for the occasional falling branch or the sound of burning logs collapsing. When I walked back around the lake, I saw that my camp was gone. My tent, my gear, everything had burned. The trees were blackened skeletons. The ground was covered in ash. The trail I had come in on was gone, blocked by fallen trees and still smoldering debris. I had no choice but to head north, away from the burn. I had to bushwhack through the forest for miles. It took me the whole day, but I finally reached a gravel road, and later, I flagged down a passing truck. I think about that day a lot now. I always wondered if you could survive a wildfire by sitting in a lake. I don't have to wonder anymore. You can, but it's not safe. It's not easy. The heat, the smoke, the ash, the fear, all of it makes it brutal. But it worked. When I camp now, I'm even more careful. I always check fire warnings. I always plan 2 ways out. And I always keep in mind where the closest water is, just in case. I don't know if I'll ever be in that situation again, but I know what I'd do if I was. I'd head for the water. It's not perfect, but sometimes it's the only option you have. I've been camping alone for years, not because I didn't have friends, but because I liked the silence. No one telling me to turn the music down, no one talking through the birdsong. I liked the kind of quiet that settled into your bones, the kind you only find in the deep woods where no cell signal reaches, where you can hear your own heartbeat if you sit still long enough. It was late September, that kind of time when the weather plays tricks. Mornings cold enough to see your breath, afternoons warm enough to regret bringing a jacket. I picked a spot up in the Cascades, off a trail that hadn't seen regular maintenance in years. No signposts, no trash cans, no picnic tables. Just the way I liked it. I packed light but smart. My tent, a small bear can, water filter, a solid knife, and all the usual gear. I planned on 3 days out there, maybe 4 if I was feeling bold. The hike in was peaceful. Pines towered above me like green spires, shedding golden light through gaps in their limbs. I heard woodpeckers tapping and the occasional coyote bark in the distance. Nothing strange, nothing threatening. I set up camp about 5 miles from where I parked, near a shallow stream. No one else around. I hadn't seen another footprint since the trailhead. First day and night went by easy. I set up my tent in a low clearing ringed by brush and younger trees. The stream ran about 30 feet off to one side, low and slow. I had a small fire going, and I remember lying back and staring at the stars until the cold drove me into my sleeping bag. No animals came near. I slept without earplugs that first night, letting the small noises of the woods drift over me. I woke up a few times just from habit, listened, and went back to sleep. Second day, I decided to wander upstream and see if I could find a better fishing spot or maybe just get a better look at the area. I followed the water for about a mile, maybe more. I wasn't exactly measuring. The land sloped up a bit, and the trees thinned out just slightly. That's when I saw it. First, I thought it was a dog. A small, dark-furred animal down in a dip near the stream, nosing around in the rocks. It crouched, squinted. Too clumsy to be a fox, too fluffy to be a raccoon. Then it looked up at me. Round ears, short snout, stubby legs. It was a bear cub, small enough to still be cute, probably just a few months old. That should have been a red alert. Every outdoor manual in the country will tell you, if you see a cub, get out. Fast. It means the mother is near, and she's not going to stop and ask what your intentions are. But I didn't listen to my gut. I stood still for a long moment. The cub didn't see me as a threat. It sniffed the air, then wandered slowly back toward the stream. I started to back away the way I came. I moved slow, careful. My heart was beating hard. I kept expecting to hear the crash of brush and the angry huff of a charging sow, but nothing came. I made it maybe 10 steps back down the stream when I heard another sound. A sharp yip, then another, high-pitched but coming from multiple directions. Coyotes. I've run into them before. Alone, they don't usually bother you. In groups, though, they get brave, especially if they're hungry. I crouched again and turned slowly, watching the cub. It had frozen, its head up and ears turning. One of the yips came again, closer now. Then I saw movement in the brush about 30 yards from the cub. A coyote stepped out, lean and pale, its ribs showing. Then another, then 2 more, for in total, all circling, slow and low. The cub stood its ground at first, pawing the dirt like it was trying to act bigger than it was. Then it turned and bolted for a small log jam near the stream. The coyotes followed, fast and quiet. I couldn't see them clearly after that. Just glimpses of fur and snapping jaws through the underbrush. I don't know what possessed me to move forward. Maybe it was the adrenaline. Maybe I thought the mother bear would come crashing in and scatter the coyotes. Maybe I was just stupid, but I walked toward the stream, keeping low, trying to see what happened. There was growling, snarling, and one sharp cry from the cub that cut short. Then silence. I stayed still for several minutes, trying to spot any sign of them. The woods felt heavier now, the way they do before a storm. No birdsong, just wind moving the trees. Then I heard the sound I'd been dreading, a deep, rolling huff, not close but close enough, followed by snapping branches and the heavy thump of paws on soil. I didn't even look. I turned and ran. Not sprinting, just that fast, purposeful walk you do when you know every step could decide whether you make it out or not. The stream bed was uneven, and I almost twisted my ankle twice. I tripped once and fell into the mud, catching myself just before I bashed my face on a rock. I scrambled up and kept going. I didn't stop until I was back in the clearing near my tent. My chest burned, and my legs were jelly, but I was alive. I spent the rest of the afternoon packing my gear up. I didn't even cook that night, just stuffed everything I could into my bag, sealed up my bear can, and sat by the fire with my knife on my lap. Every crack of a branch made me freeze. At one point, I saw eye shine at the edge of the trees, probably a deer, maybe a raccoon. But after what I saw that day, I wasn't taking chances. That night was the worst sleep I've ever had. I lay there in my tent, fully dressed, knife in hand, every muscle tight. I kept thinking I'd hear something big moving through the brush. I imagined the mother bear sniffing the blood trail of her cub, coming toward the firelight. I imagined the coyotes circling my camp. I imagined a lot of things, but nothing happened. Morning came cold and slow. Mist hung in the trees, and my breath fogged the inside of the tent. I packed up and hiked out without breakfast. I didn't stop to rest. My legs ached by mile 3. I kept thinking I heard things behind me. Footsteps, low breathing, but it was probably just nerves. I kept telling myself that. I made it back to my car by late morning, threw my gear into the trunk and got out of there. I didn't feel safe until I hit the first gas station an hour down the mountain. I sat in the car for 20 minutes, just breathing. That was the first time I realized I'd scraped up my hand on the fall. Dried blood under the fingernails, a long cut on my forearm. I never reported what I saw. What would I say? I saw a cub get torn up by coyotes, then ran from a mother bear I never actually saw. It wasn't illegal. It wasn't a crime. It was just nature doing what it does. Still, it stuck with me. The worst part was knowing that I'd been stupid, that I'd ignored the signs, that I'd walked toward the danger instead of away from it. I wasn't some greenhorn camper. I'd spent years in the woods. I knew better, but I still let my curiosity get ahead of my instinct. I took a break from solo trips after that, almost a year. Even when I did go back out, I stuck to busier trails, established campsites, places where I could see another human every now and then. It's been a few years now. I've gone back to deep woods once or twice, but I'm different about it. I move slower, I pay closer attention, and I never ever go near a bear cub again. What sticks with me most isn't the fear or the run back to camp. It's the moment when the cub turned and ran, knowing it was outmatched. That small, helpless motion. I shouldn't have been there. I shouldn't have watched. Because sometimes in the wild, you aren't a witness. You're just another part of the chain. And if I'd stayed just 1 minute longer, I wouldn't be telling this story. I'd be part of it, buried out there with the silence and bones.